take this kiss upon the brow, and in parting from you now, thus much let me avow, you are not wrong who deem that my days have been a dream. Yet if hope has flown away in a night or in a day, in a vision or in none, is it therefore the less gone? All that we see or seen is but a dream within a dream. Greetings, Poe fans. We are back, the Poetastic 2, Carmen Bolden.
And Jeannie Smith.
For Surrealism.
Is it real? Is it surreal? Is this really real? Sorry.
Okay, let's not Freud it up yet, Jeannie.
Well, it's going to be Freudian all the way, so...
Very, very, very true. Very, very true. It would have been interesting for Poe and Freud to have met.
Yes, and sometimes I think maybe Freud was kind of a reincarnation of Poe and the psychological aspect of things, because he kept delving into some of the things where you're going, really, dude?
Yeah.
Come on. What in the world?
Absolutely. So to kind of start us off with our second, I guess, venture into surrealism, we are going to have Jeannie talk about some background knowledge and history that kind of leads into surrealism, because there was the surreal something before the surrealism.
Yeah, I mean, the whole aspect of the psychological, it came and it saw and it conquered long before it ever got a name. Because if you think about it,
labeled.
Exactly, before it got a label, which is many things, they come to be before they're actually labeled of anything.
Yes.
And this one, where it started out with the movement of Dadaism. And I just love saying that.
Dadaism.
Yeah, Dadaism, which it talked about the same things, only it was more of anarchy.
Interesting.
It was more on going above and beyond and past the commonality of everybody, having the normal pictures that you were normally seeing in the art world, with the gallants of the Victorian age, with everybody in their nice little outfits.
Right.
But then when you had in Dadaism, it was all about the anarchy, all about the juxtaposition of things, how it's so unrealistic type of things.
Okay, yeah.
And if you ever want to really put it to it, if you go back to Picasso, if you go back to the Picasso age of Cubism, you got Picasso, who created the social type of Cubist movement.
Yes.
Where he was putting I never can remember what the massacre was, but it was one of the Spanish where I know what you're talking about. They killed the whole village, and he recreated it in the Cubist painting. Mm-hmm. And so in itself, the Cubism was one of its own movements, but at the same time, the psychological aspect of where Picasso was bringing forth the atrocities of war and of anger and that type of movement that was going on in the world. Everything was kind of at an unrest. And then you go into the early 1900s, where you have World War I coming into play, and right at the World War I era is when Dadaism started coming out, and that was the anarchy, the social movements, the areas of where people were trying to go against the norm.
Right, moving away from the Victorian era. Yes.
Yeah.
Is it the massacre in Korea Picasso did in 1951? It may be earlier than this.
No, it's earlier, because this was a Spanish...
this was a criticism of American intervention in the Korean War that he did.
No, this one was earlier, because this took place, I think, during his age. His early ages, and it was in Spain, I'm pretty sure.
The Guernica of the Cold War? Yes.
The Guernica of the Cold War.
Yes, I knew I could find it if I'd look for it.
Yeah. It's one of those that you know it, but you can't really remember it half the time.
Yes,
They all have some weird names.
Oh, yeah, they do.
But then Dadaism, you had that. But then Surrealism is where it ventured off into where it got more psychological. It wasn't like a political statement anymore. It wasn't for social reform. It was all about the psychology of the pieces. Yeah. And it was more about the literature rather than the actual art.
Right, which we kind of talked about was kind of people always assume it's art, but there's so much in the literature, and it takes Freudian's interpretation of subconscious and the conscious, and the wish fulfillment with the dreams, and
then
all
you got
of that
the id,
kind of
the
stuff.
ego, and the super ego,
Right.
kind of like the Oedipal complexes coming out and those types of things. But, and I mean, literature is an art form also. Writing is an art form. But when we use the term art, most of us automatically think of painting or photography.
Yes.
Or the visual medium rather than the written medium.
Yeah, absolutely.
But the term that surrealism came into play, that was coined, was more for the written art form.
Yes, and I think, wasn't that Andre Breton?
That is correct. It was Andre Breton who actually coined it in his manifesto of surrealism.
Yes, and I think they consider him the founder of surrealism, but I think you're digging for the truth.
Was the terminology of it.
Yes.
Because surrealism in itself, the definition is just sur, S-U-R, and then realism.
Yes.
So it's beyond realism.
Exactly.
That's all it is.
Yeah.
And so when he made his manifesto of realism, manifesto of surrealism.
Yes.
That's when in 1924 they kind of coined him as the father of the saying.
Right, exactly.
Because that's when the Dadaism, the movement of Dadaism went away and then came into the surrealist world. And so there was so much more for that. And then you had so many movements coming on. You have the radical movements. The 20th century, because of the early days, you had the Great Depression in America going on, and then you had World War I finishing up. So you had the civil unrest going on in Europe. You had the civil unrest and the social unrest here in the United States because of the stock market crash and the Great Depression and all that. So a lot of people were having to go outside of the norm, because if you think about it, you really couldn't create the type of art that you normally would.
Exactly. Yeah.
So you had the social art movements, the Art Deco movements.
Yes.
But then you had the poor people who really didn't have a medium, and they were just trying to create something from what they had.
Exactly. To express themselves because of all the things that were going on in the world.
And then the writing and everything, it started taking on that surrealist aspect of it.
Yes. And then, kind of moving out of that in the 20s, 30s, you have that more realistic view with Hemingway, Fitzgerald, going on that different track from there.
Yeah, but and if you think about it, to me, this is me going into my honest opinions here.
Right. Yes.
Thinking about that time period and everything, a lot of people lived in their own dreams, in their own minds, to escape the reality of what was going on.
Yes.
And that's what a lot of us do when we get into our artwork. It's a type of escapism.
Yes.
And our dreams manifest themselves sometimes to a point of really whacked out to where, don't know where that came from.
Oh, absolutely. And, we've already done our episode on Dali, so check that out, The Persistence of Poe.
Yes.
That's one of our episodes from last year that we talk about Dali more, because Poe definitely was an influence. He came to
Dali in a dream.
Yes. And so very, very apropos for what we're talking about. And with Dali, and worked with another person that was heavily influenced by Poe, and I'm trying to get through his biography right now, or one of his biographies, and it's fantastic. It's just a very large book. Was Hitchcock, and they worked together in 1945 on the movie Spellbound, and Hitchcock had him design a dream sequence in the actual movie with Gregory Peck, Ingrid Bergman, and it's fantastic. And so we're going to play a little clip from that, where it's you can get that surrealistic feeling.
Yeah, and that's the one thing about Alfred Hitchcock. He did love the verbal imagery, as much as he did the visual.
Absolutely.
So it's really spellbound.
Yes, it is spellbound. So here we go. And it has a lot of eyeballs. So you're going to have to check out this movie if you haven't. So here we go.
A man walking around with a large pair of scissors cutting all the drapes in half. And then a girl came in with hardly anything on and started walking around the gambling room kissing everybody. She came to my table first.
Did you recognize this kissing bug?
I'm afraid she looked a little like Constance.
Uh-huh. This is plain, ordinary, wishful dreaming. Go on.
Well, I was sitting there playing cards with a man who had a beard. I was dealing to him. I turned up a 7 of clubs. He said, "That makes 21. I win." When he turned up his cards, they were blank. Just then, the proprietor came in and accused him of cheating. The proprietor yelled, "This is my place, and if I catch you cheating again, I'll fix you." I'm sorry about that kissing bug.
I'm glad you didn't dream of me as an egg beater, as one of my patients did.
Why, what would that mean?
Never mind.
All right, so there was just a little snippet of that movie, and we'll also put the link in our references. But one of the other interesting things that I had not known, because I've seen this movie multiple times because I'm a huge Hitchcock fan, was that it was one of the first American films to use psychoanalysis, which is so, it ties in so nicely to all this that we're talking about.
Yeah, and it fits so well with the time period, with the art forms that were in demand at that time.
Yes.
And with Hitchcock himself being a psychological thriller type of director and writer, that even the music, because the first thing that popped into my head about Spellbound and the music is Twilight Zone.
Oh, yeah.
And Twilight Zone is one of the iconic cults about psychological warfare in our own minds.
Absolutely.
And I love always using the I'm my own worst critic type of thing, because, what's in our own head is usually 10 times worse than anything that's in reality.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
And so, Hitchcock using Dali and using Hitchcock to, embed that psychological partial into it is great.
Exactly. I would love to know if Dali and Hitchcock had a conversation about Poe.
Oh, they probably did. I mean, since they would, Poe came to Dali in a dream. Hitchcock has always professed to having a Poe, we'll call it fetish, for lack of a better way of saying it. But we all have that. We always have that thing that we get tripped up on, that one person. Like when I was in school and when I went into education, Shakespeare. Yeah. Shakespeare has always been one of those that just hit the right spot for me literarily. Yeah. Literarily. Huh. I wonder if that's a word. If it's not, I just coined it. All right.
There you go.
But anyway, and the time, and what was really interesting and going along with this was Spellbound, while Dali was actually a guest of the Warner Brothers, specifically Jack Warner, in August of 1944 had invited him to a dinner party and was putting him up at the hotel because he was helping out on Spellbound and everything. Well, Dali accidentally, or by design, you never know. On purpose, was introduced to Walt Disney.
That's
of
cool.
All people, was introduced to Walt Disney, and they became fast friends.
Very neat.
And they ended up working together on a film. Now, the irony of the film, it's only like 6 minutes and 40 seconds long.
And let me preface this. When Jeannie was doing research, we were together during part of this research. She said something about Dali and Disney, and I was like, Fantasia? And she goes, hold on.
Exactly.
So let her finish. But I got excited.
Wasn't Fantasia. It's actually called Destino.
Okay.
Destino, and it just recently was released after 50 years.
Wow.
They just released the 6 minutes and 4 seconds or 40 seconds, I can't remember. Yeah. Of the video, and that Dali and Disney did together.
Okay.
And there's this one quote from Bossert, who is one of the journalists of the art galleries. He actually said that Dali was a fan of Disney, and he at one point felt Disney was the great American surrealist.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, because I mean, Fantasia, if you think about it, and all the things
Oh,
about
yeah.
what Disney created, if you think about it, it comes from our own minds. And Disney created the whole thing of Steamboat Willie.
Right.
And he was turned down so many times for so many different things because everybody thought he was off his rocker.
Yeah.
And he was so broke, and it was in the 1920s, the same time as when Dali was started his big thing.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's very interesting that I never would have put Walt Disney in that same frame. But then I think about it, I'm going, it makes perfect sense.
It does. It totally does.
Even though he created from the fairy tales, that the fairy tales started from the Grimm's tales, which were true to it was like true to mythology.
Yeah. Well,
of that time areas.
And the true roots of fairy tales are more poetic than what Disney
it's
created.
all about horror.
Yes.
What we call fairy tales weren't truly fairy tales because it was Hans Christian Andersen that created the fairy tales.
Right.
Because he's the one that gave them the happy endings.
Yes.
In the Grimm's tales, it was all about the horror. And it was all the horrible things that was going on in that time period in those areas.
Yeah.
So it just is amazing to think about the certain things that can tie together.
I know.
And the surrealist, and then Freud, and can you imagine actually having a whole panel of them sitting around a table?
That would be amazing.
And you got Freud and Dali, and then Alfred Hitchcock.
Now
that would be something I would like to have seen.
Yes. Oh my goodness.
Because it would be like, okay.
We've got to start time traveling and picking up people along the way.
Oh, yes. Oh, and then there's one that we have to stick in there who was one of the true, off his rocker, in my opinion, ideas of literature, Lewis Carroll.
Yes, definitely so.
I love using the term of falling in the rabbit hole.
Oh, yes. And we did for this episode. Yes.
Because he was the one true, surrealist, because some of his books I couldn't even get through. Yeah.
And we will definitely probably talk about Lewis Carroll in next year in season 3.
For surrealism, for definite.
Absolutely. And another surrealist from that same era of Breton and Dali that we wanted to mention was, he's a Belgian painter, and his name is René Magritte.
Yes, Magritte.
And he was born in 1898. He died in 1967. And he really didn't gain his fame until he was in his 50s. So it took a little while for his work to kind of get attracted by, lots of different people and things. But in the 1920s, he was influenced by Freud, and then he met Breton, and I think they had a falling out later from some of the research I did. I didn't go into that rabbit hole too much. But he really started creating a lot of surrealistic art. And one of the things that he said, I'm going to read a quote from him. Everything we see hides another thing. We always want to see what is hidden by what we see. And to me, that is so much related to A Dream Within a Dream by Poe.
Absolutely.
And he's got one more quote that kind of ties into what we're talking about as well. If the dream is a translation of waking life is also a translation of the dream. Yeah. And here in just a second, we're going to talk about something else that really ties into that's more modern.
Oh, yeah, because that's the one thing, and we've all had these pop into our heads most of the time, is like, am I awake or am I asleep?
Yes.
There has been aspects of that where I will be in my dream thinking I'm awake.
Yes.
Or I'll be awake thinking I'm dreaming.
Yes.
And that's just the psychology working on you, where you've either been so stressed out you can't process anything, or you're trapped in something that it's really going over and over in your brain to where it's taking over.
Absolutely. And that's kind of where deja vu comes in. It's that subconscious coming in and going, have I been here before? Have I done this before?
Yeah. And then, and I know we didn't talk about this, but one of the things when Matrix came out, that in itself is the epitome of Poe's dream within a dream.
Yes.
Because they literally were living a life while they weren't really living a life.
Exactly.
And
There's a lot of movies that follow that same formula.
But it was one of the one that's just has been worldwide.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And so Renee Magritte loved Poe, loved him dearly. And, he pretty much did a series of paintings. He started them in 1938 and did a series through 1962. Based on Poe's story, The Domain of Arnheim. And that was one of Poe's works that he did. And it basically, I'm quoting this, tells the tale of a man named Ellison who sets out to create a landscape that reflects the supreme majesty and dignity of the poetic sentiment. And pretty much one of the things, let me find my source because it's really, some people think it's, especially in the surrealistic community, think it's maybe one of Poe's greatest stories because Poe himself held it in high esteem. And again, I'm quoting, he wrote, "The domain of Arnheim expresses much of my soul." And so when you really think about what it's about and things, it does, really portray, he was very much a poet, from till his dying day.
Yeah.
And so Magritte loved Poe, loved this painting, and created this series, and just kind of, in a way, dedicated it to Poe. And because he thought it was the ideal landscape. And so he created this. One of the other paintings that Magritte did, it's called La Reproduction Interdite. And what's really cool in looking at this, and this is very much an homage to Poe, so it's a man with his back to you looking into a mirror, and he's kind of turned a little askew. The reflection in the mirror is not the front, which we would think in the actual painting. It is actually the same thing we're seeing, which is the back of him. It's like duplicated. And it basically kind of shows that we're looking inside ourselves all the time, even though we're looking at our reflection. And then on the mantle, with the correct reality reflected, is a copy of Poe's only novel, The Narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym. And that shows the correct reality, kind of the realism versus surrealism, and showing the dual realities of life.
Yeah.
And I just think that's amazing.
And it's totally epitome of surrealism itself. It is what we see, what we think we see, and what is truly there.
Yes, and that generalization or that ambiguity of what is,
And there's another one that popped into my head that we didn't mention in that time period. In the 20s is a story from the 1800s that, with the medium of the radio, took over people's senses. The Surrealist of the War of the Worlds.
Yes.
Using people's own imaginations and what was going on in the world. Now, albeit, when I think about it, if I was in that day and age, that would have been very cruel.
Right.
Because you had the war, the world wars going on, the, communist threat was starting to happen, and people's fears over the stock market crash and all that. And then you're playing on their fears by bringing in the possibility of an alien invasion. That you truly had people convinced that it was happening to the point to where people were actually dying from being scared to death.
Right.
So that just tells you how phenomenal our minds have over our bodies.
Yes.
The phenomena of knowing that we could literally scare ourselves to death.
Yes. Oh, yes.
And to me, that's what surrealism is. It's like thinking what is in here is true to what is out here.
You can convince yourself of anything if you tell yourself confidently.
Yeah,
of something.
Exactly. And that's why when I look at some of the artwork that really speaks to me, definitely some Dali going on, it just seems that, I can see how that could be real.
Yes.
I might not think it's real,
Mm-hmm.
but I can see how it can be real.
Yeah, I agree.
Because my mind can portray that.
And then the kind of like what I was alluding to a minute ago with some of the modern things we're going to talk about is the movie Inception, directed by Christopher Nolan.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also a book, Shutter Island, by Dennis Lehane. Kind of interesting, Leonardo DiCaprio was in both of them.
Yes.
And when I remember watching Inception for the first time, and I watched it at home, and like throughout the whole movie, because they would say dream within a dream, they just kept repeating that, and I'm like, oh my God, please somebody say Poe.
Yes. Well, they probably couldn't legally.
No. Well, maybe,
They would have had to pay for it.
True. Very true.
Maybe they just don't want to pay for it. That's why they kept saying dream within a dream.
But, for both of these, we, kind of trying to go down the rabbit hole of this, that, and the other, we never could find any definite information where Nolan or Lehane said that Poe was a definite influence.
Yeah.
But I just don't see how you couldn't. And so I kind of told Jeannie that, you kind of wonder, was the subconscious playing into their creativity? Mm-hmm. Did they possibly read Dream Within a Dream when they were younger? Mm-hmm. And that stuck in their subconscious and then coming out later in Shutter Island and Inception.
Yeah, or could it just been one of those things like where you got it in the back of your head and somebody may have mentioned it, or you may have watched an Alfred Hitchcock movie, right, or something, and it just triggered that reality back into play. It's like, oh, wait a minute, this sounds familiar.
Exactly.
Oh, that would be really cool. Let me rewrite this, or let me allude something to this because this is something that would really hit it.
Exactly.
And those would be the one things, because Inception, now I will admit wholeheartedly, I have not seen either one of these.
Yeah, they're both very good films.
Yes. I have heard and even read some good things about them. And Leonardo DiCaprio is a good actor.
Yes.
I do respect his works. But at the same time, it's just the names of Inception. The name itself can give you an idea of what it could be about.
Exactly.
Shutter Island, you automatically understand. It's like, wait a minute. When I first heard of Shutter Island, I automatically went to Alcatraz.
Yeah.
That's an Alcatraz.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you do think of that. I think of that too.
But these are things that trigger your own responses.
Yes, absolutely.
So even if they never came out to say, oh, this was an homage to Edgar Allan Poe, there has to be some kind of 6th degree past.
Yes.
That's come into play.
Yeah, and definitely in both of these movies, some of the one article, and we'll link this in our references, that came up is one of the themes is the trauma of loss, and when you think about some of the lines in A Dream Within a Dream, you kind of get that as well.
Oh yeah.
And also, Lost at Sea. And, it's got the grains of the golden sand and, the surf-tormented shore and things like that. And so, again, this just all seems very nicely triangular with Poe.
Yeah, it's got a nice little, treasure map of going from Poe right into X marks the spot.
Yes,
it's like,
absolutely.
Poe in the modern times, he made it here.
Yeah, and in Inception, his character is very obsessed with his wife who died. And so one of the things that we found is that it is very reminiscent of the story Ligeia as well. We're not going to go into that as much, but that's just something to ponder, to think about. And I can
watch
see
Inception
and read Ligeia, and I could definitely see some ties there.
Yeah, because we don't want to put too many spoilers into the movies if you've not actually seen them yet.
Exactly. Yeah, I do not want to spoil it at all.
That's one of the things about I haven't seen it, so I can honestly say I'm not spoiling anything.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm not going to spoil it for people.
Yeah, exactly. But you can just, like I said, you can just get from the title of the movies or even the books, and most of the time just a little synopsis can start your brain to thinking.
Oh yeah.
It's like, oh yeah. And and like with Dream Within a Dream and Poe's obsession with Virginia and Annabelle Lee, and every time, he's always thinking about loss and talking about loss, and that in itself is another thing. Grief is a major player inside your own mind.
Oh, yes. It can do lots of odd things to your brain when you think about the loss of people.
Yes, and it takes so much to recover from that loss, from that grief. And grief can change a person. It can change a person's personality.
Absolutely.
It can drive a person to the point to where there's no coming back.
Madness.
Exactly. So that in itself is where you have the psychology of the dream within the dream. So
yeah, I agree. We kind of have I think, wrapped up our surrealistic journey for this episode. We definitely want to invite you on December 27th at 7 p.m. Central Standard Time to Zoom with us, and you can go to our website and go to the tab Poe Unplugged and register. We're having Holly Michelle, one of the Poe authors. She is reimagined an Edgar Allan Poe children's series, and we're going to be talking about the bells and her reimagined story of the bells.
Exactly. She's going to be a special guest that's going to be answering questions, giving us a little insight into her idea of reimagining these things as to where a kid can understand them, which is, Poe being understood by children is kind of a difficult thing. You can't get all the nuances of the whole Poe, but you can still get things that
especially the horror.
Exactly. You really don't want to introduce that to the children, but it is.
And the bells is definitely not horrific. So
no, and it's actually a really good thing. We did that on our New Year's special this
last year. We read it. Yes.
This year's New Year's special.
Yes.
Okay. I'm getting stuck in time.
Are you trying to be surreal, Jeanie?
I'm trying to be surreal.
That's how you get surreal.
Exactly. I got surreal.
Yes.
But yes, please come join us. Don't forget to check out our Facebook, our Twitter, our YouTube. We have our Poe Unplugged specials that you can venture into, along with other things of where Carmen has been traveling around and doing little tidbits about where Poe has gone.
And now that I am on winter break, I'm hoping to upload more videos of some of the travels and finding Poe things in Poe places.
Exactly. And 6degreesofpoe.com, our website. You can also find a Poe shop.
Yes.
Where things that we've created with Poe-esque.
Yes.
And even Poe stuff. So come check us out. They can make some cool Christmas gifts.
Yes.
We got bookmarks. We got earrings. We got T-shirts. We got some cool
things. A little bit everything. And we've ordered, we finally received our little pins for your lapel. We're going to be adding those, and I'm going to be making some cat hats here soon as well, and you might be able to see pictures of me and Jeanie in them once I get that finished.
Yeah, you probably see a true cat sitting on her head too. But
those
aren't for sale,
and we might even put one on the cats.
Oh yeah, no, not mine. You can try yours, but it ain't happening with mine.
Might wear one, but I'll have to make a little one for him.
Oh yeah.
So it'd be a black cat on a black cat.
Yeah, and I could make a video of that and put it on YouTube just for comedy's sake.
Absolutely,
because that'll be hilarious. But anyway, so on that note, with our Poe surrealist type, we would like to say, Poe out. I stand amid the roar of a surf-tormented shore, and I hold within my hand grains of the golden sand. How few, yet how they creep through my fingers to the deep, while I weep, while I weep. Oh God, can I not grasp them with a tighter clasp? Oh God, can I not save one from the pitiless wave? Is all that we see or sing but a dream within a dream?